Anyway, I preach a gospel that's got without taken out, so you'll immediately notice that the middle part of that gospel reading is missing in the lectionary, and seeing as that's the one I'm going to be preaching on this morning, I'll read it out for you now. So, verse 45. Immediately Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to Bethsaida, where he dismissed the crowd. After leaving them, he went up on a mountainside to pray. Later that night, the boat was in the middle of the lake, and he was alone on land. He saw the disciples straining at the oars because the wind was against them. Shortly before dawn, he went out to them, walking on the lake. He was about to pass by them, but when they saw him walking on the lake, they thought he was a ghost. They cried out because they all saw him and were terrified. Immediately he spoke to them and said, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." Then he climbed into the boat with them, and the wind died down. They were completely amazed, for they had not understood about the loaves. Their hearts were hardened. So it's a familiar passage, one that's echoed in Matthew chapter 11. So let's see if I can put a different spin on it, as they say. For the Jews in first century Palestine, Israel, a large body of water is often represented as an evil power that opposed God's plan of salvation, because God seemed to be always rescuing people from water. No doubt remember Noah sought shelter from the flood. The Red Sea needed to be parted to allow the exiles to flee Egypt. In the book of Jonah, when the seas raged with anger, God sent a big fish to keep Jonah until he was ready to do what God told him must be done. In Job, towards the end of Job, the last few chapters of Job, God tramples on water and walks the recesses of the deep. The psalmists speak of God's power over the seas and use water as a symbol of peril and danger. "Save me, O God," says the psalmist, "for the waters have come up to my neck." So raging seas and howling storms would have represented chaos and danger. In that short passage, that short few verses, fear dominates the story. There's the fear of being separated from Jesus and the fear of the raging waters. Fear can become infectious, such that when Jesus approached the disciples by walking on water, even his image becomes terrifying. They thought he was a ghost, and they cried out, and they were terrified. When Jesus said, "It is I, do not be afraid," they recognized him. The act of walking on water was unmistakable. Even the most accomplished and faithful servants can become overwhelmed when faced with more danger than they imagined. Fear is real. Fear can cripple. And it's hard, very hard, to hold on to faith when you're in the middle of a storm. Now, there's some argument about this, but the phrase, "do not be afraid," or "fear not," some people argue appears 365 times in the Bible. 365 times. There must be a point to it all. Jesus' "do not be afraid" confronts so many truths, especially where we are at this moment, still going through the COVID pandemic and the after effects of that pandemic. Fear is infectious, just like COVID. One fear-inducing circumstance aroused doubt that Jesus was present for the disciples and spread from one to the other in the boat. Fear is dangerous because it turns us away from God. Fear can take us from focusing on what God has done and can do. limiting what we can and are willing to do. And Jesus' earthly life is bracketed by warnings against fear. Early on, we have the angel announcing his conception to his mother, "Do not be afraid." The angel announcing his resurrection to the women at the tomb, saying, "Do not be afraid." So where is God when we're faced by danger, by things out of our control, when we're in the middle of a storm? Is God immanent with us, or is he transcendent, somewhere up above, not with us at all? Maybe in this incident, he was inviting the disciples to reflect on what it means to be alive on the other side of a situation they thought would kill them. You see, for us, that situation might be, as I've already mentioned, COVID. Now, I was just talking to Tricia earlier in the service, before the service started. I didn't know you could catch COVID again after being double jabbed, but apparently you can, as our, we call it health minister recognises all too readily. The situation might be COVID, it might be a divorce, it might be another illness, it might be the death of a loved one, the loss of a job, it could be depression from all this self-isolation. It can all feel as though, one way or t'other, it's going to kill us when we see the numbers gradually rising up of the number of infections, the number of admitted to hospital, and the number of deaths slowly increasing. Maybe if we survive whatever situation we're confronted with, we are being encouraged to ask questions. Where was my faith? Where is my faith? Where was God? What did I fear? And I wonder if this short passage is an invitation to reflect on what it means to be God's people, especially when being God's people doesn't give us special dispensation for an easier, storm-free life. There are some streams of thinking that would have us believe that if we just have enough faith, or think positively enough, we will draw only good things to us. I know about that because I've experienced that kind of thinking myself. That the reason why you're ill is because you've done something wrong in your life. If we think more positively, then you can overcome this, that, or the other. But we know that life doesn't work like that. Bad things happen to all people, good and bad. To think that storms happen because we didn't think enough positive thoughts or practice the right kind of religion is just spiritual doo-doo. Right faith is a way to find meaning. As a female theologian writes, nowhere is the presence of God amid suffering more potent than on the cross. Therefore, what can I do but confess that this is not a God who causes suffering, this is a God who bears suffering. We should expect to find God there, in the mud, blood, confusion and mess of everyday life. In so doing, can we trust him? Can we smell him? Can we find him? Can we touch him at that moment, as the people were longing to do at the end of that gospel reading? If I can just touch the hem of his garment, I will be healed. So this is the challenge I gave myself after looking at this passage. I have a goal. You know how you'll be and I will be in a personal storm. And you think, I'm sinking here fast, God. The wind is against me. The rip current is pulling me from the safety of shore, God. Everything I ever believed in is falling apart. I'm not waving, as Stevie Smith said, but drowning. But when you look back on it, 6 months later, you're still alive and the world didn't end. It's now just over 7 months since Maggie died. I'm still alive, and the world hasn't ended. But one day I want to get to the point where I can trust God in the moment and not just in the retrospect months or even years later. I can confess that my faith in God was not for a sixth the death of Maggie. And I'm only just getting to that stage where I can once again, trust God. So I haven't reached that goal yet where I can trust God in the moment. But I hope to, with God's help and God's grace. Amen.